Eta, ladies, gentlemen, and baby birds, and welcome back to the channel. It's your host, Uttapan Dragon, and today we are going to be acknowledging some elephants in the room. And no, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the latest addition to FromSoftware's rather long list of S-tier productions, and that is the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, which is an extension of Elden Ring. Now, Elden Ring is a game that does not need any introduction, being one of the best games ever made by, in my opinion, one of the best game developers in the world. But by the thumbnail of this video, I'm pretty sure that you can guess that this is not a Miyazaki glazing session. So put your pumples back in your pants. Based on this video's introduction, I'm sure you can see that FromSoftware is my favorite game developer, having created two of my absolute favorite games, Bloodborne and Sekiro. So I'm pretty sure you can see why I was so excited to play Elden Ring, and close to creaming my jeans when the DLC released as of June of 2024. Unfortunately, that excitement was as short-lived as your parents' marriages, because towards the ending of Elden Ring and the beginning of the DLC, I started to notice a slightly cunty vibe oozing from the game. Before we begin this shit show, I just want to preface this by saying, in no way, shape or form am I insinuating or accusing either Elden Ring or its DLC of being a cash-grabbing scheme or some half-baked garbage. Because in all veracity, the DLC alone is a more complete game than majority of today's game developers' entire list of games combined. This video is going to be addressing a very specific aspect, and probably what is the main concept of Elden Ring and its DLC. Now, Shadow of the Erdtree has been a title that's been booming through the gaming community for the past couple of months. I've noticed a great many posts and threads discussing the game, but personally I've stayed clear of them so that I could blindly experience the game for myself. And my god, this DLC didn't fail to deliver and disappoint at the same time. Right off the bat, stepping into the DLC, the visuals alone tickle your pickle in a different type of way. Its rather breathtaking and awe-inspiring first impressions is something that FromSoftware has perfected at this point. But brushed up and heightened visuals weren't the only greatness that the DLC held. Brand new enemy types and not just some copy and pasted garbage. Unique weapons with some rather refreshing move lists, designs, and Ash of Wars. Every area in the game looks brand new, showing off some rather diverse settings and atmospheres. Even stepping into the dungeons and forges and being introduced with pristine and clean, straight out of the box designs that was refreshing compared to the base game's here we go again type of designs. Everything about the DLC moaned maximum effort, and truthfully it's something that you can expect from FromSoftware. All this greatness paired with no microtransactions, no half-baked and half-assed garbage, and no scamming of their community for a quick cash grab. Sounds good, right? Wrong. When you have a developer that's dedicated all of their efforts into perfecting one specific type of game over a 7 different game series, and they've done it so well that they've actually created an entirely new genre of gaming, it can only lead to them not knowing what to do anymore in order to maintain that very unique factor along with the same level of genuine difficulty, that you begin to start finding what I like to refer to as manipulating mechanics and assets in order to emulate difficulty that comes off as more artificial. This is something that I started noticing fighting most of the endgame bosses of the base game and a very small amount of the base game enemies. Because Elden Ring is so vast and has an open world progression with an open world setting, a lot of its enemies have lost their value or feel purposeless. This is due to the enemy's presence being so dense and repetitive on the entire map that you'd rather just run by them and ignore them, because it's for the most part just pointless fighting them. Compared to their more linear setting counterparts like Bloodborne and Demon Souls, in which you actually found purpose and pleasure to fight all the enemies that you stumbled upon. And I think this is something the developers recognized during production and made 5 enemies that you just cannot outrun. And that's the Rune Bear, Giant Birds, Giant Lobsters, Royal Revenants, and Crucible Knights. As enemy types, these 5 perfectly sum up manipulating enemy mechanics in order to emulate difficulty. Not only do these 5 enemies have exceptionally large movesets, but their attacks have close to no telegraphing. They hit like trucks, are constantly aggressive, and like majority of the enemy types you'll encounter in Elden Ring, they can read your inputs. Fighting something that hits you for 50 to 60% of your health per hit, which most of the time you don't even smell coming, and you being equipped with a healing item to use that takes 2 seconds to get off, while engaged in a fight against something that attacks you every second in an erratic manner, all while reading your inputs, can't be reasonable difficulty, even at FromSoftware standards. It feels cheap, underbalanced and undertested, and leaves a sour taste of this is absolute dog booty. But we pulled up our pants, got back on our high horse, and got over it, comforting ourselves with, nah, FromSoftware wouldn't do this to us. I'm just bad at this video game. I just need to level up more. And truthfully speaking, after you've encountered these enemies a good amount of time, you'll learn more manageable ways to adapt to them and develop, in quotes, cheese strategies. But this video is centered around the beginning experience. And given that it's a FromSoftware game, the beginning experience is a learning experience. So I don't see how much of learning goes on when normal random enemies two-shot you for the most part. But as I said, we learned it's best to just run away from these enemies rather than engage with them due to the lack of purpose it serves to fight them. But what really fondles my balls the wrong way is when you experience all of these skid mark elements in a main storyline boss of the game. For me, there were 3 bosses of the game that just really gave me pink eye to see, mainly because they were gimmick boss fights. And that's something I would have never expected from FromSoftware. Mohg, Rykard and Malenia were bosses in the game I got to and knew for certain that the FromSoftware team clearly just ran out of ideas and started throwing unwashed ass cracks at you. With Mohg being the gatekeeper of the DLC, he ascended to being one of the most important bosses in the game. What makes Mohg the Lord of Period Blood such a shit show of a boss is that you need a very specific tier for your physic flask in order to avoid being one-shot by his inevitable phase change. But if you lacked imagination and failed to explore and obtain said tier, you would need 2 healing flasks in order to survive his phase change. Otherwise, you will inevitably and immediately die. Additionally, Mohg heals from his phase change, and if you fail to deal damage to him during his famous Nihil, he will regain health all the way back up to full. Additionally, he has an exceptionally large moveset with truck-like hits that have a mixture of well-telegraphed attacks and attacks that have 0 telegraphing. And his phase change adds a bit more mental illness to the mix. Rykard, being one of the cooler looking bosses in the game, is all too forgettable besides one factor that stands out, and that is you need a specific weapon in order to even begin to fight him. Because Rykard is surrounded by a pool of lava that looks as if it's oozing from his ass, because it goes with him everywhere that he goes. Now, granted, the game provides you with the weapon at the entrance to his fight, but if that doesn't scream gimmick, I don't know what does. Finally, leading the pack of bosses of the base game that I thought were shit shows stands the infamous and previous face of Elden Ring, Malenia. The reason to why most players regard Malenia as the, in quotes, most difficult boss, because she's one of 3 bosses in the game that can heal. But she does it in a more constant way, being equipped with her own personal Great Ruin that grants her lifesteal upon successful hits. This being paired with an extremely wide reach, massive moveset, and erratic and non-telegraphed moves, all while reading your inputs at the same time, makes her a formidable boss. But that's not the end of it. She's one of the only bosses in the game that has 2 entirely full health bars and a grab attack that will guarantee one-shot you. Now, even though her second phase does add on to her rather large moveset, majority FromSoftware veterans find themselves absolutely perfectly dodging her entire move list. And besides all of this difficult but fair odds, the reason to why she's on this list is because of her absolute garbage dog water foul dance. It's been nearly 3 years since the release of Elden Ring, and I'm still yet to see any player reliably dodge this move without being hit by it every time. She oftentimes spams this move, and your positioning will ultimately dictate the outcome of your survival, because this one move will not only one-shot you regardless of how big of a health bar you have, but if you miraculously survive after she's hit you with the entire move, she will almost be back up to full health, regardless of how much of damage you've done to her. But even with this absolute shit show of a move, we still miraculously beat her due to 10% well-timed dodges and 90% luck. And that right there is what stings about these encounters. To call difficulty skill-based while dependently relying on luck and build specs can't be anything but cheap. But we accepted it and brushed off these absolute cheap combat encounters and still proceeded to buy the DLC with a sliver of hope that the developers would have read up on some of the backlashes they've received for certain encounters the base game had. But my god, I could have never been more wrong. I guess the FromSoftware team refused to get off their high ego horse and proceeded to unload the most ludicrous combat encounters I've experienced in any of their games. Now, given that I've platinum Elden Ring and I'm only 2 endings away from achieving platinum in both Bloodborne and Sekiro, and prepared a new game plus character for this, I was fairly confident that I was prepared for the difficulty of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. And truthfully, I was for the most part. Having enemies that near one-shot you, normal enemies that felt like wandering boss fights, to well-placed enemies that got you to roll off small ledges that you had to inevitably traverse in order to get to certain areas, all while having these encounters being turned up to 11, was truly something that I expected from FromSoftware and was prepared for said encounters. Until I got to the first divine dancing shitcat, which, depending on the route that you took, should have been your first boss encounter. Besides being an example of a camera boss babe, this was indeed the more faster moving ones that FromSoftware made. Having health bar destroying attacks that were almost impossible to see coming due to the boss's head or ass being the only thing that you could see, made this fight formidable on its own. But FromSoftware was not pleased with that difficulty and decided to add 4 different element types to the boss's moveset and constantly changing phases, which made it really difficult to equip talismans or armors to negate these element damage types, because each element did huge amounts of damage. But that, my lonely friends, wasn't enough, because they decided to make the encounter even more miserable by adding an entire phase change in which you could not attack the boss in, and that's the lightning phase. After the boss performed a move, the area that it struck would be hit with a follow-up AoE of lightning. And all of this consistently happening while random lightning strikes thrown from God knows where littered the entire arena in rapid succession, which left zero room for you to attack said boss because you were too busy spam dodge rolling for your life. To top it off, FromSoftware thought we loved this boss so much that they put another divine dancing lion in the Rao ruins. But this one also has a death blight phase. After witnessing this first boss, a disappointment so primal engulfed whatever happiness I had, because I came to the realization that this was just the first boss and it already had prominent gimmick aspects to it, which led to the first time in my life that I was actually so sad for being so right, because out of the 50 plus bosses in the DLC, 5 of them, 4 of which being remembrance bosses, all had a gimmick aspect to them. Gaius had a charge attack that he did in the beginning of the fight that was undodgeable and took 70% of your health. Nita, the mother of finger diddlers, vast array of attacks that were undodgeable depending on your positioning. The divine dancing lion had an entire phase that you could not attack him in. And Bale, which was probably the coolest looking boss fight in the entire game, that I didn't get to see for myself during my own playthrough, because while fighting him, I couldn't see shit, running around like a Timu version of Stevie Wonder, relying on audio cues to know when he would attack. And last but not least is the Daniel. Now, after encountering every single boss in the DLC before Radahn, which turned out to be the final boss, I was fairly certain that this wasn't going to be fun for me. But even after all of that, I still remain hopeful that FromSoftware maintained a minuscule bit of respect for their fans and themselves. But no, they smeared whatever regard I had left for them like dried shit in the crack, with what I can only refer to as probably the worst combat encounter I've had in any of their games. Not only did Radahn have one of the coolest entrance cutscenes in all of humanity, but I noticed during said cutscene that he was also a rather big boy, which could only mean one thing for me: camera boss. Besides having the largest attack pool in the entire DLC, fighting Radahn felt like he was literally hitting you with planets. Besides executing 70% of his attacks absolutely quickly with zero telegraphing, he also had a cross attack that was not dodgeable, because if you dodged the first swing, the second swing would 100% hit you. Apparently, Radahn wasn't only Mikola's boyfriend, but also the most skilled hacker in the world, because he read all of your inputs. Remember when I said it takes 2 seconds to heal in this game, with probably the most evil animation in the world? Well, Radahn attacks you every second, with extremely brief moments to either heal or attack him after his rather long attack sequence, and that's if you didn't die first after getting hit twice. Additionally, he had a pull attack that if he caught you in, you would follow up that attack with the AoE attack that if you weren't naked and timed it correctly in order to dodge, it would obliterate your health bar. Keep in mind, all of this mental illness is taking place before his second phase, which left me questioning my life decisions in between fog walls and redos. After 40 plus attempts and a bleed build respec, I finally got him down to 60% health, to which he responded to with his phase transition. And despite being the coolest shit since sliced cheese, it's also where the camera boss babe side of him started to show its prevalence. Because, for the life of me, I don't know if I was having a stroke or a seizure, but I could always never see or know what's going on during said second phase. But even though the unnecessary disco was enough to trigger any epileptic, there were more moves that FromSoftware felt he needed, so they added it. They also thought he didn't look cool enough, so they gave him a little homie to big spoon his back and further obscure your vision, leaving you legally blind during this fight. And besides having the most ludicrous telegraphing in any video game ever, they added arena covering holy AoE damage to every single attack that he performed, which is what gave the fight its disco-like effect. And additionally, it staggered you every single time it hit you. And even after all of this asylum patient's weed fever dream that took place during this fight, I still felt that it was fair odds. Until Radahn began to soar in the air like a fairy angel and perform attacks that were nearly impossible to dodge. And that's when I began to notice the gimmick peering around the corner. After 69 more attempts against Radahn pressing all the buttons and some sheer dumb luck, I finally beat him, which truly felt better than tickling your pickle for the first time. And honestly, I was so looking forward to seeing what Radahn, the promised Hope Destroyer, had locked behind him besides Mikola. And lo and behold, it was probably the worst ending I've seen in all of gaming history. A Wish version of a 2-for-1 type of deal. And my god, that stung so much. All of that, all that mental trauma and nightmare fuel for that. It felt like a massive middle finger straight to the booty hole, because it came with this realization that my favorite developers, being responsible for my favorite games, have become unhinged. You know what truly sucked about this? Not the finger enemies that sniped you with endless reach and pinpoint accuracy from across a map that seemingly had no purpose, or the fly enemies that performed a grab attack that was seemingly undodgeable, or even the lion head enemies towards the end of the game that were near boss level difficulty. but that everything else in the game was seemingly perfect. The remainder of the DLC had all the hallmarks of a FromSoftware game that I looked forward to, that I grew to rely on. Beautiful sceneries and areas, well-designed platforming and hidden secrets, extremely dense lore implications, vast exploration with well-needed rewards, to their hallmarked bosses and environments that still possessed genuine difficulty and challenge. Sure, there were gimmick bosses in the game that ruined the entire experience, but most of the bosses were just truly something special and left you with a feeling of, holy shit, I'm touching myself tonight. It served as a reminder that all of this could have been so great if the few negatives of the game didn't cast such a massive shadow over the positives and suffocated their brilliant light. I'll never truly understand why the developers would do something so sinister, and I eventually just settled on the assumption that they did all of this just to stay relevant and make headlines for making the in-quote hardest DLC ever. But for the people like me that just saw it for what it was, as being cheap, undertested, and just the overall shell of its glorious predecessors, it truly just felt like a waste of what could have been a beautiful experience. The reason to why I took this so harshly is because FromSoftware are the pioneers for making games that are actually worth more than what they are asking for in terms of price. And truthfully speaking, I would hate to see them fade into obscurity chasing these rather ludicrous ambitions. Stuff like the PvP aspect of the game ruining a lot of the base game elements beyond recognition is a prime example of these ludicrous ambitions. If you've played Bloodborne or Sekiro, you already know that the combat of Elden Ring is a step down, being not as responsive or entertaining. And this is because even though you become Elden Lord, a random pot-throwing enemy can easily stop your attacks mid-animation and give you a facial disgracial because of your character's abilities being almost non-existent due to needing to balance the game for the PvP scene. All of these aspects might seem minuscule on their own, but together they can cause a catastrophic turn of events that can make these legendary game developers become just another Activision. Truthfully, this DLC just disappointed me. I would have never expected FromSoftware to look for such an inconsequential ego stroke. The same developers that still keep their game servers up for games they've made nearly 6 years ago. I truly hope they come to the realization that we held their productions so dearly, not for being flashy or making headlines, but for being genuinely dense, skill-based games that showed off genuine difficulty and challenge. And for the FromSoftware groupies that are about to jump into my comment section and say, get good, or you just don't understand the concept of the game, my friend, I think you misunderstood that saying. It's ride or die, not ride it till you die. And that, my friends, is going to bring us to the end of this video. If you were lucky yet unlucky enough to play this DLC, let me know in the comment section in what way you chose to view the DLC. To all my Warframe baby birds that want to know where I have been and why I haven't been posting videos lately, that is none of your business. But do not fear, I am still here to hold you in my ginormous arms. I will be making another well-needed Warframe video guide soon. If you enjoyed this video, do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button. But because I know you are a cheapskate, I just want to let you know that it's entirely free and it helps me out a ton. As I said, I will be posting another video soon, so don't forget to turn on your notice for that. And with that being said, I'll see you all there.